Today's book is Time Windows by Kathryn Reiss. If you cannot tell, it has been through the ringer. At some point in my life, I taped it and it's coming apart again. It has seen better days. We're missing parts. I love this book. I cannot tell you how many times I've read it. I probably read this book when I was 5th or 6th grade, if not sooner, if maybe a little later. I don't think it was later. And I've read it multiple times since. If you've never heard of Time Windows, well, first, where have you been? Second, it's a ghost story. It revolves around a young girl named Miranda. She's about 13, 14, and her parents have decided to move the family from New York to Massachusetts. They're tired of the grind. Her mom is a doctor and she wants to open her own practice. Her dad is a history teacher at a college and his health is just failing. And so he's thinking, you know what? If I'm going to stay healthy, I got to get out of the city. I got to get away from the stress. So they moved to Massachusetts. I think my love for home improvement shows comes from books like these, if not this book in particular. Because they move into a fixer-upper. They move into a spooky house. In the attic, Miranda finds a dollhouse that is the exact replica of their home. She learns that the dollhouse was actually carved by a runaway slave because the house had been a stop on the Underground Railroad. The problem with this stop at this house was that their hiding place was airtight. And so the first and only slaves that tried to hide there nearly died. While they're recovering, the guy in thanks carves this house. What she learns is by sitting behind the house and looking through the windows, as she's doing, well, it's actually technically, she should be on this side. She should be looking into the house, from the inside out. She can see the past. She can see people who used to live in this home. She doesn't put it together, but spooky things are starting to happen in this house. Essentially, there's an entity that inhabits the women, particularly, who come to stay and or live in this home, and then bad things tend to happen. But it's not just bad things, but it's a repetitive, it's repetition. There's 2 timelines that she sees. There's the early 1900s and then there's the 1940s. Things that she is seeing happen in the early 1900s, she sees repeated in the 1940s, and then she sees it within her own family. First, her cousins, her aunt and uncle, they come to visit, and then the aunt begins to show symptoms, just very uncharacteristic symptoms. When she leaves, she's like, you gotta leave this house because there's something wrong with this house. Eventually the mother, who, side note here, this has always bothered me. When I was a kid, I thought it was kind of cool, but it still bothered me. Miranda calls her mother Mither. I don't know if that is a name that Rice came up with just for this book, or if people up north call their parents stuff like that. One of my favorite lines is actually when the neighborhood boy comes over and they're trying to find the hideaway in this house, and she refers to her mother as Mither, and he's like, what are you talking about? And then he's like, well, what about your dither? Her dad. I thought that was actually quite funny. But the word Mither, I don't know why it bothers me so much. I'm like, what's wrong with the word mom? And her mother begins to show the same symptoms, same headaches, bouts of anger and lashing out. The thing is, though, nobody else can see what she sees through this dollhouse, but they can sense a presence, an evil, something is wrong about the attic. What she realizes is that, so the first family of the house, the originating family, the family that had built it, it's their ancestral home, are the Galworthys, Sigmund, Lucinda, and their daughter, why can't I remember her name? and their daughter Dorothy. We're just gonna jump into some spoilers. They live in a time period where women don't work. And Lucinda is a very uppity woman, and she had gone into her marriage saying, this is the kind of lifestyle that I want to live. However, they live in a town where that's just not feasible. And even though he's a lawyer, apparently he's not the best lawyer. It's not sustainable either. She is like, well, if I can't live the lifestyle that I feel that I am owed, well, then you'll need to let me work. And of course, he won't let her work because women did not work in that time period. She has all these anger issues, and then she's just not a good mother. She's not a good wife. She's very selfish, very self-centered, and she's abusive towards Dorothy. And what happens is Lucinda has had enough. She decides she's gonna run off with her boyfriend. She's going to leave Dorothy with the family next door, and everybody's just gonna figure out when she never comes home that she's left. However, Dorothy makes her angry, so she locks her in the attic. She tells the family next door that she's going to take Dorothy with her. Then the train that she and her boyfriend take crashes, and then what happens is Dorothy, she's locked up in the attic, and her dad is under the impression that she died on this train. He is catatonic, and he never comes home. He just stays next door, where they essentially nurse him back to health until he can go, and I think he goes to New York to live until he dies, not knowing that Dorothy is actually at home. To make matters worse, so this is funny, not funny, this is something, I'm not sure if it's really a paradox or not. But when Miranda and her neighbor Dan go looking for the hidden room that is supposed to hide runaway slaves, they find it, and then inside she finds Dorothy's body. Through certain information and suppositions, she's thinking maybe Dorothy died because she was playing in this hidden room. The trap door fell and she couldn't get it open, and that's why she died. Only to realize that there's a certain point where she's watching through the dollhouse. Dorothy sees her from the other side. She gets so scared that she stumbles into this trapdoor room, and that's how she dies. I'm not sure if this is one of those situations where she died because she was so startled and she fell and she knocked the door closed, or if there had been some other reason she was in there and it just so happened at this point in time, that's how she ended up in the hidden room. Now Miranda's like, I know why this house is haunted. I know exactly what I need to do. I need to lay Dorothy to rest. But actually, it's not Dorothy who is haunting the house. It is her mother. It's Lucinda, who, even though she didn't know Dorothy died because she died herself before she ever would have known something had happened to Dorothy, I guess there was a grain of decency in her. Her spirit haunts this house so that Dorothy can get justice. It's not just finding Dorothy's body and letting people know, hey, the person who's claimed to be Dorothy in this train crash was not her, this is her. It is saving Dorothy. What Miranda does is, when she has watched through the dollhouse, there has never been a scene that has repeated itself. In fact, most of the scenes that she sees are from the 1940s family, who are descendants of the Galworthys. She's come to understand that the 1900s scenes are kind of the more special ones, are the more important ones. But what she has been seeing is there are certain scenes that are repeating. So she's like, these are pretty important. I'm gonna pay attention. She realizes that the day that Lucinda is running off with Donald, she had taken off her coat and something had fallen out of the coat. Miranda guesses it's the key to the attic. She's able to recover this key, and then she puts it in the attic space in the dollhouse. Dorothy, who has come around to the other side, finds the key, lets herself out, and there we go. This is one of those fun things about playing with time, where I did a review on another middle grade book that was formative for me called Time for Andrew. In that book, the boys switch places. The one is dying of diphtheria. They're able to cross the barrier. One survives and then they switch back and blah, blah, blah. watch my review if you want to know more. But what the Andrew does is he's like, you know, if I was supposed to die originally, maybe I shouldn't mess with the future so much by getting married and having kids and possibly changing things. Well, in Time Windows, Dorothy actually does. There had been this boy that had been a good friend of hers, even though they're only 8, but he was devastated by her death and kind of went crazy in the aftermath of it. She ends up marrying him. They have kids, and then her great-granddaughter gets introduced at the end of this book, and then she plays a bigger part in Pale Phoenix. And so it was neat how they played with time and how you can change the future. And then that's where it ends, where we realize Dorothy survived, Dorothy had this great life, and now we're coming full circle and we're reaping our just rewards. For this reread, and it's not really new, in that my favorite parts were when we got to see the past, but what was new was how disconnected I felt in terms of the present. And I think some of it may have to do with the writing, where I could tell it's a little bit dated. And yes, it's middle grade. It was most evident when Reiss was depicting Miranda's current day and her interactions with her friends and her family. It just felt a little juvenile, a little less interesting or intriguing. So I did find myself, and it got better towards the end. It really did. Like, once the mystery started picking up and it integrated itself more into Miranda's life, the book picked up, and I was cool with it. Although there was a scene towards the end where she goes to a graveyard. She was going to the graveyard just to double check, like, see what happened to Dorothy after the mystery is solved. So she only confides in Dan, who I keep trying to think, how would I react? Because for the sake of the novel, I'm really glad she had an ally. I'm glad she had someone to be on her side, because it's gotta be hard to carry on the weight of what she's seen. After she saves Dorothy, she goes back to the cemetery, the graveyard, just to kind of check on things. She runs into Dan, or actually technically Dan runs into her, he follows her. But he doesn't remember a thing. We get kind of this recap, and then she starts to have memories. So it's kind of like an alternate reality, where if Dorothy had never died, this is how Miranda's life would have gone. And so these are all the memories that are replacing the dollhouse era memories. I don't really need any of this. It's kind of superfluous. And so I did skip through that just to get to the end, and because I knew what was coming at the end, and I enjoyed the end. Otherwise, I thought that basically from like the middle of the book on, everything was smooth sailing and interesting. I enjoy a good mystery. I love a good ghost story. I mean, who here watched Are You Afraid of the Dark? So there you go. Time Windows, boys and girls. I hope you enjoyed this one. Catch you on the flip side.